Hello, good evening, one and all. We are here for the third edition of Infocus interview. In this edition, we will be interviewing Aastha Patel. Aastha has had a very interesting journey, starting from her engineering at BITS Pilani. Then, when she went on to pursue her metals program, which is Masters in Education, Technology and Applied Learning Science from the Carnegie Mellon University. All along, Asta has traveled back and forth in academia in large scale projects such as the Gujarat project, where she was in a fellowship called the International Innovation Corps by U Chicago. She's worked in EdTech Tulna. She has also worked at the Indian EdTech space in a product called Rocket Learning. At the same time, she has also been part of research, published a lot of papers. She's won the ICALT Best Paper Award. So welcome, Asta. Good evening.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
So interviewing Astha are very two interesting engineers as well. It almost seems like we are all invoking John Dewey. Um, Education is engineering. So we have Suraj. Suraj is currently a master's student at the Education Technology Department in IIT Bombay. Suraj has done his bachelor's in Information Technology Engineering. Hi, Suraj.
Hi, good evening, both of you.
Hi, good evening. Joining Suraj is Deepika, who's also pursuing her master's in education technology from IIT Bombay. Deepika has interestingly completed her bachelor's in textile technology.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Deepika.
Yeah, hi everyone. So now I hand over the floor to Suraj and Deepika, and we are all ears to hear this interesting journey, Astha.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Lakshmi.
Yeah, hi all again. How are you, Aastha?
Hi, doing well. Hi, Deepika. Hi,
Yeah,
Suraj.
it's raining very heavily in our side. Is the same like in your place also?
No, I think it's quite comfortable here. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, then let's move on to the questions. If that's fine. So, very first question, Aastha, I would like to ask you is, can you tell us about your journey from engineering to educational technology? Like, what motivated you to make this switch? Can you please?
Sure. So, I would start everybody's interest in education begins with their own learning experience throughout school. So I went to a fairly progressive school in Rajkot, where we were introduced to good pedagogy, inquiry-based learning, and introduced to lots of educational technology products at a very early stage. So when I kind of moved, it made me a very curious learner. Uh, and then when I went to engineering, it was like a contrasting learning experience for me where there was a lot of rote learning. It almost feels like I'm quoting Three Idiots. But when I observed myself as a learner across different experiences, not just in like an academic or in a school setting, but I'm also a trained Bharatanatyam dancer. When I saw myself as a learner there, and when I reflect on that, I realized that learning is a very interesting space. So only like when I was in BITS doing my engineering, I kept questioning the way we were assessed, the way we were taught, how motivated the students were, etc. And I felt like something was just not right, because I of course compared that with my own school education. So often found myself like having long conversations in the library, talking to people about, hey, my school was so great. So amidst that crisis, like when I kept thinking about it, I just thought, let me just do some research on it, with like a lot of like intrinsic passion to kind of transform the way education works in India. So that's what the thesis that I started with. So I cold emailed a lot of professors at that point to say that I want to work in the education space. And I landed up at the ET department at IIT Bombay for my final year thesis, where I came in absolutely just with a lot of motivation to make some impact in the education space. And that's when I got introduced to the formal aspects of what it is like, what is learning science, etc.
Hey Astha, it's good to hear. You have a very wide field, I would say, in BITS Pilani, and there you were also talking about your school days. So, and you were also saying your school was a very good, but then you realized you should get into some edtech field. So, and my question is from your LinkedIn profile that you have mentioned you are a learning engineer. Can you just tell us about what learning engineer is and how you also got to know about this term?
Sure. So, learning engineering is a term, it's a fairly new term actually, though it was coined back in the 90s by Herb Simon, where at that point he mentioned that learning engineers would be experts in designing learning experiences. And it is popularized by somebody called Dr. Bror Saxberg. So, learning engineer is somebody who has the knowledge of how people learn, the theoretical grounding of how people learn, and they recognize that there are lots of factors including context, etc., when it comes to learning. And there are people who analyze data, who look at learning, find patterns, notice, conduct small experiments and inform and design learning experiences in certain contexts. So and on the other hand, learning engineers, the term engineer comes from them being able to also understand the technologies and implement at large scale. So just as an analogy, just like we have chemical engineering, um, they any pharma company would hire the chemists as well as learning engineers, just the way like they would analyze different parts. So basically, they advocate and emphasize the need for connecting the computing technology and generated data with like an overall goal to optimize learning environments. So broadly, a learning engineer merges the learning science and data to design powerful learning experiences.
So it was really interesting to, I like the last sentence that you made. It's a combination of learning sciences and data because these two things generally don't go hand in hand if I'm not wrong, because I also learned both these things in my first year. So they're very different from each other. But when you are a learning engineer, you get to merge those things. So it's very interesting. So I would like to ask you the next question. So you have mentioned in your LinkedIn profile that you have worked with government, you have worked with NGOs and in private sector also. So can you take us through the contrasting experiences which you came across throughout your career?
Sure. So I would say I tried different things in different phases. The first thing, as I mentioned, after finishing my engineering, I was in the academia for about a year and a half. So that's when I spent time at IIT Bombay reading learning, research papers for the first time, taking the base learning courses on the basic learning theories, etc. So when I was at IIT Bombay, I tried working on smaller, conducting research studies or assisting actually the PhD students with research studies, where I focused on maybe designing the learning environment. For instance, my research back then focused on scaffolding reflection for engineering design for students who go to middle school. So what I worked on, like the only skill at that point I had is I've done a lot of Lego robotics. So I worked with like designing studies where we looked at how children reflect and manage uncertainty and took up the role of an observer. So, very interestingly, during my probably the first ever research study, I actually taught Lego robotics to the students, and then I was observing how they were like solving a certain problem, and I just went and kept giving them different hints, etc., to different students, and I realized that I was not putting on the researcher hat. So at that point, I was like doing teaching and research at the same time. Parallelly in Bombay, I was teaching a few students who go to a Lego robotics sort of a center, just taking them through like a design thinking process on how to identify problem on like for a competition that they were participating in. So while I was at IIT, I spent some time doing research while I was teaching at the same time. I spent about like a year and a half there. And then an opportunity actually fell into my arms, the Social Impact Fellowship with University of Chicago, where I was actually put up as a role of a project manager with the government of Gujarat, where we worked on like implementing DIKSHA. DIKSHA is the EdTech app of the government of India. at scale. So Gujarat has about like 30,000 government schools. And the concept of the product was already made by the team. My job was to work on implementing the product at scale with the government, which required like a lot of institutionalization, like working with the government stakeholders and like introducing the idea of the project and getting the government folks to implement it at scale. So it was almost like we were placed within the government, and we needed to enable different stakeholders to take action, etc. So I can talk a bit about the DIKSHA project as well. So they worked on energizing textbooks. So every government school textbooks is where they put like QR codes on concepts that they found difficult. So now these textbooks are now called as energized textbooks. So the entire scope of figuring out where the QR code should go, to working with like subject matter experts on creating content that goes with the QR code. So with the DIKSHA app, when you scan the QR code, you can watch the video of that concept from a perspective of like in a vernacular language. So we actually took the entire process of, and also working with the textbook board to get it printed, and then training teachers to use DIKSHA. So it was like a very like a sudden zoom out from what I was doing at IIT, where I was working at like a cognitive level just with like 7 students, but doing very deep work, observing, thinking about, okay, what did they think at this moment? What was the reflection? And then suddenly there was a product given and we were working at scale. So which made me understand the entire stakeholder within the ecosystem, like, and also that at scale delivery is a big thing to think about. That how does the content actually reach the remotest village in Gujarat? So we were talking about such problems. Even I realized that human capacity is something is which needs to be built and is limited. So a lot of training programs, etc. So that contrast did give me a lot of learning. While I was at IIT, I got a good understanding of how people learn. I learned theories on it, build like an intuition, and like applying those theories on how to design better educational technology or like better learning experiences in general. When I went to DIKSHA, I realized that hey, this is such a simple product, right? Like all you're doing is scanning a QR code to watch a video. But at the scale of Gujarat, like at the scale of like when you talk about like millions of kids who are going to access it, the impact was really high. And the process of reaching that very, very simple thing is what I learned, so I understood like a stakeholder. So I'll just pause here in case you have any questions.
Yeah, it was very interesting to know your journey here, especially in the government, I would say. I would like to just mention one point that I also experienced in the last year. That you said that you just have to scan the QR code and you get to watch a video, and but actual process of creating that video and where to put it is a very lengthy, tedious process, I would say. So yeah, it was very interesting to know from you.
Got it. So actually, it so happened that I worked with IIT, and then I worked with like when I was working with DIKSHA, I got to know that there are a lot of different stakeholders that I in the ecosystem. There's the government, there are like nonprofits, there are some smaller NGOs, and there are like fellowships that run. Which like so, I mean, I realized that there's a big engine of people which actually lead to impact in the education space. So I got an understanding of that. Turned out I finished like 1 year of my fellowship. Also during COVID, a lot of our content that we created in the first 6 months was used and sent through WhatsApp to students. So I felt a sense of optimism that hey, there's so much that can be done to impact like the huge population of students that we have. And it was not just at Gujarat. We worked with like other state governments as well. I mean, other like just the way me and my colleague we worked in Gujarat. Every state had different representatives, so we would have like a dashboard, and we could see that okay, what state, what are the number of content plays, etc. Um, also, like when we after working with DIKSHA, I happened to get this opportunity to like I was like in constantly in touch with the ET department, and I got to know about the Tulna project. So that was a very natural step for me to take after having worked with IIT and then working with the government, NGOs, etc. Because this was like a research practice partnership where IIT Bombay worked with Central Square Foundation to work on it. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Astha. It was literally like you have huge experience in it, and you also wore different hats, like project manager, like teacher, also mentor, implementer, and a researcher as well. So that is really interesting. Now, I also thinking like one of the most important thing is balancing the hat of a researcher and practitioner that you actually did. So in the EdTech IIT B department, you have mentioned that you also published multiple research papers. How did you manage that different hats, and how you were able to publish these papers also? Can you just give a flash on that?
Um, so I think even I have been like floating through the ecosystem project after project. What I want to do is document my learnings at every place. And of course, because my entry point was through an academic space where we conducted 2 research studies, it takes rigor to think about it and like document it. When I saw that opportunity, of course, requires the time and you need to take that time out. So having worked with Tulna, which was a research practice partnership, it was almost like about a year that we spent collaborating with other stakeholders. I started recognizing that there are like some productive tensions when you work with, like when practitioners and researchers work together. And since I had worked a little bit with both of them, I could understand the perspectives of both very differently. So, I mean, honestly, it's just a personal motivation that I want to document everything that I'm trying to do. And a research paper helps me pause and reflect on what I just did. So when I worked with Tilna, and then I'd applied for my master's, so I had some time. I just took that time to reflect on that year, like different questions that came to my mind to just feed my curiosity. And I did realize that research can also happen in like a practice space. So I spent about a year at Rocket Learning. We built something together. And after finishing that, right now I'm writing a paper on what we built, and it just helps me uh, go deeper into the whys of every step that we took. So it's literally just a personal motivation. And it helps me build credibility. So that's always helpful.
Yeah, I definitely couldn't agree more because if you really like something, those hats, I guess, automatically gets changed. You don't even realize that. Okay, so you mentioned that you applied for the Carnegie and at the same time working in Tulna also, right? If I'm not wrong. So when doing the transition, like from academic setting to professional setting, maybe vice versa also in your case. So like, what challenges did you face in these transitions? Can you please explain them?
Such, I do think that these were not challenges particularly, right? I actually saw these differences as opportunities as well to see how these collaborations happen. And since it was the very beginning for me, the academia space, I got a good theoretical grounding for, okay, how learning happens. And I mean, I think I would just consider myself lucky that I had about a year to just sit down and learn about how learning happens and like read research papers, know about what's new that's happening before actually going and solving like a real. So when you work in the practice space, you're given like a very specific problem at hand, and you have to work within the constraints. And so those theoretical, I think I got that time to marinate those. And of course, it makes you a little. It made me, I would say, I would talk about myself, a little unrealistic with nahi aise hi hona chahiye, right? Like this is how learning should happen. But when you go and you realize that okay, maybe during a research study, because you design things very intentionally, it is possible to collect learning data, like clean learning data. But when you're working at the scale, maybe through non-traditional methods, collecting that learning data is very difficult. So there's always like a tension between learning and engagement. In the practice space, a lot of products, they have to use some metric to monitor, and the metric usually used is engagement, that yeah, the product is being used. So I remember briefly when I said about DIKSHA, the metric used was the number of content plays, the number of QR code scans. And I kept wondering that, okay, does this necessarily mean that children are learning? But at that point, they don't have any other metric to measure that. Of course, there might be some RCTs going on to see whether that is impacting learning. But from a product standpoint, I keep seeing these tensions, but I recognize why that happens. Of course, the pace of work in the practice space is very quick, where you have to kind of turn things around, and like you cannot spend a lot of time thinking about something, but like you have to continuously keep documenting and keep pushing the wheel and see the apparent progress. And honestly, though I say that I keep wearing different hats, when I was working for DIKSHA, like the volume of work was so much. We were amidst the pandemic, so a lot of like learning responsibilities, like we had to figure out WhatsApp channels, we had to make sure the content is ready. So amidst that, it's more like, getting things done, sort of a mindset. But when you have that intuitive sort of a framework in mind, it does help to make sure it is aligned. So I would say just these tensions is what I felt, but I honestly did not spend a lot of time in academia too as well. It was like a brief moment for me. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you mentioned that you got to know about the different tensions going into the industries or something. So my next question is, how important it is to get to know the ecosystem while we were working or whatever it is. So how it is important.
So honestly, when I transitioned from IIT, from the ET lab to Diksha, that's when I think I had a very kind colleague who actually sat me down to actually understand, because there were so many new terms. Like I didn't know there were like blocks and what were like these. There were so many like like government has different samsthas, etc. So we sat down to write, like actually map out all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, and not just stakeholders, but I feel generally in terms of the ecosystem. I read some uh, VC reports, etc., to understand what are different products and services in the system. Just to say that initially had a very biased view of what edtech is. Like I only thought of like school education and university sort of a context as edtech. But when I actually went deeper into understanding the ecosystem, I realized that, hey, I am actually a learning engineer. My expertise is somewhere in designing learning experiences, which need not necessarily happen in an academic environment only. It could be like, other like skilling, etc., which is not very academic specific, could also be that. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my own experiences in the industry till now. Okay, so we talked about why understanding the ecosystem is important, but we have not talked about skill set yet, right? So let's talk about the skill set one should have if let's say after 1 year I want to join the industry, EdTech industry. So what kind of skills should someone have to join the industry? Are they genetic skills, not genetic, sorry, generic skills like let's say you should have communication skills, etc., or are there some specific skills that you should have to join the industry?
I mean, I think a lot of things that we learn as a part of the department, in terms of like having an understanding of how learning happens, understanding the theories of motivation, being able to design and communicate the ideas. So, like, I think in this space, I've seen people wearing lots of different hats and lot of different, I would say, you can be a UX designer working in the edtech industry, right? Because you, as a UX designer, you understand the concept of, let's say, cognitive overload that happens. You've learned the Mayer's multimedia principles, which are very learning specific, which are, I mean, any UX designer does know that it is important to reduce cognitive overload. But when it comes to somebody who's designing particularly for learning, it translates to that. When you've spent time doing research in like small groups, there's something that I learned as a part of my master's program, which was a cognitive task analysis, where if you're designing something for a specific concept, you work with an expert and a novice to solve the same task and actually create an entire framework around it. So this was like a hard skill that I learned, which was very helpful. That before I design something for someone, actually spend time with the user, like with the learner, to understand what their prior knowledge is and see how the same problem is being solved by an expert and a novice, and like contrast it and being able to like identify smaller knowledge components, etc. So in terms of skills, I honestly feel that um, it depends on what your interest areas are, because even I would say like I'm still figuring things out as well. Like being able to communicate your value itself is a big skill that you need when you work in the edtech industry, especially if you're pitching yourself as a learning designer or a learning engineer, because these are still very new terms. Even if somebody is like running an edtech startup, they would not know a lot about or what it is, right? And it's very difficult. That's why the term learning engineering is very important. And I have felt that way, that I can do a lot of things. I can, if you want me, I can design like quick sketches for what that learning experience could be. I can think at this, or when there are constraints, I can think at the scale of, okay, within those constraints, how can we design like a learning experience on WhatsApp? Or how can we motivate? So like, I mean, I think it's a very multi-dimensional sort of role that there is learning engineering. And it's not just one thing for sure. Like, you know, have the knowledge of how people learn, you understand that there are different factors, you can analyze data, like, you know, learning relevant data, etc. So it's important to know what your skill set are and communicate that value to the stakeholder in a very focused way. And even when you,
Okay,
sorry,
so
so,
no, it's
sorry
okay.
to
Go
pause,
ahead, go ahead,
but
please.
it so happened, right? Like, I think when I worked with, let's say, Rocket Learning, I joined in as a learning designer. And after some point, when we started designing something, I had to switch that role to become like a product manager, because I worked with the product team, which looks at a lot of like engagement and product aspects. And I worked also with the content team on Rocket Learning, which focuses on like creating content. Now, I was supposed to be the bridge between these two. That's how I think, I mean, to be able to design like personalized journeys on WhatsApp, we had to bridge these two uh, different stakeholders in some way. And because I could speak the language of the content team as well as uh, the product team, it became much easier for me, that I was able to extract out good elements of pedagogy while designing, let's say, an educational game with the content team. So I ran like co-design workshops with them. And when I worked with the product team, of course, we had to think about, okay, it goes out as a certain app, what are some constraints, how do we scope timelines, etc. So even I find this role to be very multidimensional. So it requires you to be a very good communicator. But honestly, that's something that I chose to be. I like being in a multi-stakeholder project management sort of roles. So I'm naturally taking that step, but I have seen other roles, especially when I saw learning engineering posts. I saw it when I was in the US, when I was just graduating. We were looking at different jobs, etc. So there, the learning engineering jobs were like very specific to maybe analyzing data and iterating a certain very specific aspect of a learning engineering. I have been working on very 0 to 1 projects where we are scoping and creating new things, which requires me to be in a multi stakeholder environment.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I couldn't just help, jump in. So, Asta, I heard you talking about, communicating your value and, how a learning engineer is so very important in all the different, let's say, edtech product or, large scale implementations, education implementations that happen. So I also want to understand how important, or do you feel the need to communicate to the ecosystem as well? Because at some point in time, is the ecosystem mature enough to understand the need for the learning engineers? Like you are able to communicate well, but how do we kind of, communicate it back to the ecosystem? Like say, hey, learning is complex, learning is just not engagement, learning is more. So you need specialists, learning engineers. You need people like Suraj and Deepika come in. So how do you do that? Any thoughts on that?
I think, I mean, I would say if I did not do my master's program, even I wouldn't have been very confident, honestly, because I never had a formal experience before that. Something that helped me to gain that confidence and then be able to work on communicating was my capstone project. I might not be directly answering your question, Lakshmi, but the capstone project that I did, it was like where while I was doing my masters, we were asked to work with a client, and we were literally thrown into a situation where uh, my client was from like Japan, expecting us to be machine learning engineers, but we were not. And they were developing a system which required a learning engineer. So I think by design, it was kept where our professors be like, you have some value to add, just go and talk to them. It was like a lot of tension, and where we said that, yeah, machine learning is not our expertise, but doing like contextual inquiry with the people who use their product helped us. So when we were able to kind of go deep, talk to the researchers and come up with insights of, hey, these are some learning problems that we actually figured out with lots of like discussions and affinity mapping that we did as a team, we actually came up with certain insights, and then it eventually just transitioned into us providing a better where we within our team we had a UX designer, a UX researcher. So I do think case studies, etc., of how such projects has led to a larger impact. In fact, like I think that's definitely worth exploring, because Dr. Bror Saxberg, his life mission now is to actually talk to people about learning engineering, and getting that mindset into it. He spent a very long time at Kaplan conducting studies at scale, and showing that delta in learning, but with organizations. So I feel maybe partnerships with like larger educational organizations where we intentionally work on these projects and again document it in a way that we are talking more about learning engineering as a discipline should be helpful. Yeah, I was just
Yeah.
reminded of my capstone days.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I mean, my key takeaway, and is like, for people, Suraj and Deepika, is to engage as much with the ecosystem, even when you are a student. Engage in any way, engage in communicating, engage in, that's the kind of key takeaway for me. I say is engage as much as you can with the ecosystem to get them to understand the value. Yeah. Over to you, Suraj and Deepika.
Yeah, thanks Lakshmi also. Like she has reflected something on what we should do as a student of EdTech. So yeah, I'll move to the next question now. As I see, you are self-employed now. So what are the current opportunities for the people in EdTech? Can you just reflect on that? Like
As do you, hmm.
yeah, let's say like there is a freelancer or entrepreneurs. Can you please shed some light on that?
So I think very recently I have been self-employed, but uh, what I have been doing is like networking very, very heavily to be able to, talk to people working in this space. In fact, I would suggest that like from the very beginning. In fact, when I started my time when I was at IIT, it was during ICALs that happened at IIT Bombay. So I had no idea. It was literally my first day. I kept networking with researchers, and since then, even with the industry, like I try and expanding my network across different stakeholders. So how I work as of now is to kind of scope out smaller projects with different clients. Uh, it requires to communicate the value that you have to add, and deliver and document things in a way that they complete the loop of what they expected. So broadly, there are freelancers, there are people working as learning experience designers within organizations. I think LXD community has come up very strongly. I have joined a community called the LXD Lab, which is a community of learning experience designers where we actually work and created some we wrote some shared case studies across for like products across. So there's learning experience designers and entrepreneurs. Like I think India has the highest school going population with so many problems to solve in the learning space. So if you read about the ASR report, etc., like there are opportunities to solve problems at scale, even at a smaller scale, be it literacy, numeracy, or even like communication, etc.
Okay, so this has been very informative session for me also. I've been taking some notes also. So Astha, I would we had about different hats we have to wear, right? So we talked about you have to wear different hat as a researcher and as a practitioner, but you have worked for the government, you have worked for the NGO, you have also worked in the private sector, if I'm not wrong. Now you're working for yourself, like you're self-employed.
Yeah.
So can you just tell a little bit about how your approach is different in all these sectors? Like when you work for government, how is it different from how when you work for an NGO or when you work in a private sector and all?
Sure. Um, so when you work with as a researcher, right? I'll just start in the order that I said. I think your focus is more on feeding your own curiosity, right? Like answering the questions that you have, doing it at a smaller scale. Um, and the output is, I would say, a paper, etc. So there, I think of it as intrinsically to learn about new things that are happening, approaches, and answering some questions that you have. When I worked with the government, I think it was in a very like a project management role. So there, my approach was definitely, as I mentioned earlier, to get things done. But in a government space, you have to do a lot of stakeholder management, particularly because there are like different people you have to work with. There are some wheels that you need to push. You need to know whom to talk to, what, like create very uh, show a lot of data around the project that you are doing, right? Like that is something which was very much required, but I do think that changes case to case. um, but with the government, like being able to understand the massive scale and the impact that the product that would have, being able to work with the constraints of both technology and also human capacity, I felt that the most when I worked with the government, where it so happened, right? Like when I was in the IITB class learning about Mayor's principles, like I knew how a video should be uh, created, right? Like how a learning educational video should be created in an ideal world. But when I was actually given a task to work with the teachers from the government school teachers, the subject matter experts actually, to create videos, 50 videos. I mean, I had to take into account the human capacity, the possibility of what technology was available to us, and genuinely, like I would say, I did not pay any attention to how well was that design, like video being designed, because my task was to get it done. So I did feel these tensions, as I mentioned earlier. But it depends on the role that you're taking up. Had I if my role was of a learning engineer with the government, which I think is a very far off thing for now, I could have paid attention to that. But there, my job was to get things done and deliver results.
Yeah, as Suraj has mentioned, he is taking the notes. I'm also taking the same notes. Like, yeah. So the next question is like, what advice would you give to students or professionals who are transitioning into education technology, and also how they can get relevant with the future trends in the field of technology or education technology? Can you shed some light on that?
I also need advice, but I do think from what I have seen, right, like I would say young professionals in this space, the kind of things that they're doing is what I find helpful. A lot of people in this space are definitely intrinsically motivated to kind of make that impact in the education space, to be able to, go out of your way to like I would say look for projects, etc. So first thing, and I think it's a very basic thing everybody knows, but actually recognizing that if you are in edtech at an early age, you are very lucky. People keep telling me this, that how do you know you want to do this, how are you passionate about it? Because I feel at least in the next 25 years, the problems to solve in the education space will never deplete, and the need for a learning engineer will only keep increasing, provided like the entire ecosystem is pushing the wheel for it. um, I see a lot of Teach for India folks. I'm sure we're all aware of what Teach for India folks who have spent time on field. Like I feel like I necessarily did not get those 2 years to be on field and spend a lot of time in context for the users that we are designing. So those folks are the people who have been teachers in within a constrained environment, and they come off to be very good employees when it comes to the edtech industry, because they understand the context, they understand how people learn, I think, through a lot of training, etc. So what I get from that, and I'm also trying to do, is to engage a lot with um, schools around, like if you're interested in K-12, but like spend time uh, in schools as institutions to actually get a realistic understanding of what are some problems and what is possible, what is not possible in this space. Um, so that would be one thing. And of course, like I think at this point, I try to keep thinking that with the newer technologies, the way learning happens is changing completely, right? Like it might change. Like I think half the time that I'm thinking about, I'm like, okay, if I am working using chat gpt so much to work quickly, right? Like I'm using it, what kind of jobs are we preparing the students for, right? Like then what should be the implications of such powerful, and I think that the curve has now gotten just steeper, right? There are going to be a lot of more like advanced technologies to come off. I keep also thinking about what are some skills to teach, like and how to measure them, right? As from a learning engineering perspective, like we know that we have to measure, assess to kind of improve. You can only improve something that you can measure. So when I think of these newer 21st century skills, that which people call the 6 C's, right? Collaboration, creativity, how to measure them, how to create environments for that, because those would drive the future. Because now, uh, using the same traditional pedagogy or like same content and bringing it online, I think there's a lot already. We need to think of newer paradigms. In the I try, but that's what's required in the field, is what I understand.
Okay, thanks, Asta. So, I would like to ask you a question about products, but before that, I would like to mention something. So, I know few people who work for Teach for India. Harsh is one of them. I don't know if you know him. He
Yeah.
worked in LXT also. I think you know him.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I found that product really interesting because it is literally, we call it in Hindi, it's a kundali of each and every edtech product. So he has analyzed edtech products and he has given a little bit of report kind of things. So would you also like to mention like what interesting products you're currently working on for yourself or for some other company or anything?
So, I mean, I recently worked with Rocket Learning. So, first of all, yes, definitely. The LXD lab is like a collation of different case studies where we, I mean, I think as a group of learning designers, we thought what should be the lens to, I mean, understand how different edtech companies have solved for a certain motivation problem. So, it's a repository of case studies which focuses particularly on motivation. That's why it's called Motivation Matters. So you gave me a good anchor to actually pick some products from there. Definitely, like Rocket Learning is one of the product which works within the constraint of using WhatsApp to actually reach the parents and like the mothers of like children of the age 3 to 6 who go to Anganwadis. So when we actually understand the ecosystem, these are like kids across India. They go to these public preschools called Anganwadis. Now, if we want to improve their literacy and numeracy and other cognition aspects in the early years, you need to reach them through the parents. So I found that to be a very interesting product where we are using a very constrained channel to share content. And there, the science is about how do we engage parents on a WhatsApp groups within their constraints of digital literacy, even generally being able to consume content and like get back to WhatsApp. So a lot of science of um, so I find Rocket Learning very interesting. EI has been like MindSpark is one of the products which I actually used as a student when I was in school, and then I evaluated it when I was in Tulna. So it's a very well designed, personalized adaptive learning software. But within this space, like I think a lot of newer products are coming in, like a lot of like chat gpt wrapper products are coming in for students as well to be able to learn better. I recently came across something when I was in the US. It's it's a product which helps you focus while you're working, surfing through and trying to work on a specific learning objective. I think it's still in stealth mode, so I might not be able to name it. But yeah, there are a lot of new products coming in.
So Astha, you have studied in USA, right? So you talked about some products in USA also. And next question I would like to ask is like, I'm definitely sure that there is a huge difference between edtech ecosystem in India and in USA. So can you please just shed some light on that? Like, what is that difference that you observe in USA and India is in reference to the edtech ecosystem?
Um, I'll be honest, like I think I was mostly there as a student, but I did spend some time to analyze a little bit of what's happening in the US. It's just like, I mean, there are a lot of companies hiring for learning engineers there. There are like, every university actually has like an edtech sort of a institute which is focusing on how to actually use data to improve learning within. So they're calling them learning engineering institutes at a university. So that's something new that I found. I do think the edtech industry in India is focusing on a lot on the the other data which people keep quoting, like around numeracy and literacy, and like they're built for that. But edtech in the US particularly is they're trying to solve for competency based learning, like building better learning management systems for schools which have an IB like curriculum. So those are the kinds of products that I have seen. But like I think all of us have used Khan Academy, etc. These are all their new products. I mean, I think this just reminded me of how I view edtech and like how my uh, perception has evolved with time. Initially, like I always thought like an edtech has to have a student and a teacher, like sort of a learning environment. But with time, I've recognized that edtech is not just that. Like, if we design like a tool for teachers that is in classroom, which is helping her to teach better, that's also edtech. Like, being able to design better learning management systems, that's edtech too. So like I think my understanding has broadened with time as well.
And Astha, we also see that you have a bit exposure of alternate schools in India and abroad. Can you share some experience with us?
Could you tell me what do you mean by like what kind of alternate schools?
Yeah, like schools where they don't directly teach to the students, but they let the students explore by themselves only to different
Okay, I
different
mean, I
things.
got it. So I mean, I think there are a lot of like newer schools coming up, and I feel there, like I somehow have started feeling like schools are very different places compared to being working in like an edtech product, right? Where you're actually, so there you need to think about the school from like a holistic perspective. I recently went to the Sekmol school, which is in Ladakh, right? Where the school which was highlighted in Three Idiots, actually the same school, where I saw that okay, students are like growing plants. I mean, being able to actually look at their entire routing and finding opportunities where they can learn beyond academics. So broadly, I think I have found those spaces very interesting. But when I go to those places, I actually forget about the use of technology, particularly, like because there's it's very organic in learning. However, the issue there is usually scaling a school with such a high quality learning experience, right? Like being able to get teachers who can facilitate that, etc. So those are kind of alternate schools that I've worked with, and I'm doing some projects with newer schools which are trying to innovate.
So, what kind of projects those are? Can you just tell us a little bit about these projects also? It would be helpful for the upcoming students.
So like I'm working with a school which is trying to rethink their entire approach on designing assessments for them. So they want to create an assessment as a general system where we are actually defining with the philosophy that the founder wants. How could the learning happen in classrooms? How could it happen at a year level, at a month level, etc. So the kind of projects that I've been doing. Also with a few, I would say, edtech or like tech startups where they want to redesign their user experience, like generally the which requires me to think from the stakeholders' perspective on what they are trying to learn, create like a framework of learning objectives for them, and create an entire experience around that.
Okay. It's very interesting actually. I mean, because when you talk about alternate schools, it's like the non-traditional teaching methods they use, like they use constructivism or maybe constructionism also. It's a very new term, I guess. So, Asta, as a learning engineer, like, what is the future of learning according to you? Like, you might have thought about it sometime.
um, I think learning will become the most important skill. It has always been, but like with the newer technologies around, newer tools coming up, uh, what will become important is self-regulation, right? To be able to, I mean, I feel right now I have so much content on YouTube, but like, how do I actually create that space for me to be able to make sure that I learn from there? So, I feel like that's probably the direction in which we are going. When I try and contextualize that to schools, I feel like uh, now we have the ability to actually let give like use the same concept, like where the child is learning the same concept, but let them view it from like different contexts, make it like problem solving based, etc. So broadly, that's where I'm going. But as we say, like the role of the teacher is definitely shifting towards facilitating, and the kind of skills that we are focusing should be on the upper triangle in the Bloom's taxonomy, because that's what they would do when they are in the working industry. Just a second. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting actually, because in 1 year, like Deepika and I will be out of this IITB, and we also need to find jobs, I guess. So you might have observed definitely that online learning has become mainstream nowadays. You know, like since COVID, I guess that has happened. So also with climate change, blended learning seems to become a norm nowadays. So how do you see the future of schools and higher education? Like it is, I guess, a connected question to this only.
Um, Schools and higher education. I think with schools, I do think um, being able to design like a I mean, I mean, I might be wrong, but I do sometimes feel curriculum might get a little obsolete, right? Like where there are skills, we get students to kind of come and collaborate, use technology, try and learn what they want to learn, right? Like I've recently just learned about something known as a 2-hour learning module. It's called the Alpha School, where students actually come, they self-learn on different like product, like PAL products, like personalized adaptive learning products, where they do the academic learning which they basically need to get done within the 2 hours of the first entire school hour, and they spend the next 4 to 5 hours working on their own passion projects. So those kinds of models, I'm kind of recognizing that if we can actually finish a lot of academic learning in a shorter time with tools uh, which help them practice and learn better and like go at their own pace, um, and free up some time to do like more projects, that would be an ideal, and will be the same for like even the higher education spectrum.
Okay, very interesting. So it has been almost like 54, 55 minutes. Now we can actually move to the audience questions. So I would like to
Sure.
ask audience if they have any questions to ask.
I would like, I think while we wait for it, I would
Yeah.
also want to know what you think around, how are you looking at the edtech ecosystem, and if you have other, ideas around how who you see using your skills in this space.
So I recently did my internship in Kotak Education Foundation. So it was quite interesting for me because it was first time I'm testing my skills. You know, like for 1 year you learn something. Now when it was time to test it, I was a little bit conscious about it. Like did I really learn something in that last 1 year? But when I actually went into the, on the field, I conducted some workshops, I designed some content. I really find it very interesting to do that work, do that kind of work. And it definitely has a bright future. It is just my personal opinion. And yeah, I mean, I guess Deepika would also like to contribute because she also did her internship in a big organization.
Yeah, so I did my internship at Agastya, and it's opposite to Suraj ka answer, I think, because like I was thinking I learned a lot, but when I went to the industry, I was like, oh, what I have to do, what I'll do. It was literally like some confusing terms, different terms they were using in the industries, but then I got to know, and yeah, I was successfully able to complete my internship.
Lovely. I mean, there's definitely a lot to learn in both the sides, right? Like, I think I find myself lucky, as I said, uh, when I was at IIT, I got that time to kind of absorb all these theories, internalize, and build that shared vocabulary, right? I think as a tech society or as a community of practice, we all speak the same sort of a language. And then, of course, when we go to a new place, like when I was at Rocket Learning, I was the only learning designer. So that's why it felt like, oh, I need to communicate a lot, I need to do, but like, as I think this role will kind of keep growing, there would be more people of the same kind within the same organization, so it makes things easier. But yeah, I think working with different projects, new companies, new problems will always help broaden perspectives.
So we have actually one question from the audience. It is from Mayur Burle. So he's
Sure.
asking that in the domain of learning analytics, can you please share career opportunity, as in what organizations hire MTechs and for what role?
Um, I think honestly, my answer would be within the learning analytics sector. I think there might be even some of the big techs that are hiring, because like I would say Google, Amazon, etc. They run their own professional learning aspects, and they do a lot of like learning analytics things. Honestly, Mayur, I don't know any current organizations that are hiring, but how I would approach from your end, because I mean it's usually the case, like nobody's hiring for learning engineers, analytics, etc., but like designing a very strong portfolio of what learning analytics is and what value that you are adding, and then reaching out to current edtech companies around what, but definitely some of them like education initiatives, etc., who have a lot of data would be definitely hiring for it. But I don't see any official roles for learning analytics. So I think as a community, all of us have to go and pitch ourselves that, hey, this is how we add value. So portfolio, definitely a portfolio would help. Am I audible? Just
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
checking.
yeah. You
Yeah,
are.
okay. Sure.
Okay, so we have one more question from, I guess, Neha. So she's asking, hi Asta, how do we keep learning as an instructional designer? Do you have any course recommendations? Like she's also asking about if you can suggest her some courses.
So I think instructional design, particularly, I think even I haven't seen, but I usually feel like if you look through the general learning design theories, etc., and like if you've gone through it, you're ready enough to kind of go and work as an instructional designer. But like taking up smaller tasks, the framework that I usually use for instructional design is the understanding by design, which is the backward design framework, where you start with learning objectives. And I'll definitely look up if there's a course for that, but I'll put it on chat. It's called UBD, Understanding by Design.
Yeah, so another question is from Felix. I hope I pronounce the name correctly. How to measure learning? What are the variables?
Sure. I think the first measure when it like comes to learning is definitely engagement, right? And then mastery for certain learning objectives is how we do it. So if you actually break down any learning experience into smaller learning objectives and be able to define what's the mastery for it. That's how you do it. There's some elements of also being able to measure motivation, the completion rates within a course that you've developed. These are all different metrics which would guide you towards learning.
Yeah, it's almost been an hour, guys. I mean, this is an amazing conversation. I had fun listening and engaging, and at this point in time, Asta, thank you so much for sharing all your experiences, giving us the time. Thank you, Suraj and Deepika, for putting in all the questions and taking your time and making this happen, right? And At the backstage, we have Dr. Briju, we have Dr. Sarika, and also Ramdas, who is constantly like bringing us on the spotlight. So it's been fun for me, and at the same time, yes. Dr. Briju is conducting a NPTEL Plus course on instructional design. So do check that out. Someone, Neha Jadhav, had asked this question. So please, you could check that out. And thank you all for the time. And I hope by sharing our experiences and our path, we kind of support someone who is looking for that, the support that someone is seeking. Thank you all. Before I close, I also want to talk about a little bit about the T4E abstract submission that are going to happen. The deadline has been extended. And keep watching, looking out for EdTech Society's events, the master classes, the Infocus interviews, and the other events that keep happening. Thank you all for your time. See you all again.